We're rolling.
Welcome to the REI Rookies Podcast,
The Real Estate Investing Rookies Podcast, episode number 14, where we invite you to follow us on our journey towards financial freedom using the power of real estate. I'm Josh Koth.
and I'm Jack Haas.
And here at REI Rookies, we believe in a couple key principles. Number one, the best way to retain information is by teaching it to others. And number two, a rising tide lifts all boats. We're not competitors, we're a community. All right, let's get into some real estate investing. We're right in the middle of a series on acquisition strategies. We've covered the first one, MLS, second one, FSBOs for sale by owners, and this is number 3 in the series of 4. Today we're going to cover off-market properties, which we find using direct mail and bandit signs.
So let's start talking about direct mail first.
All right, so direct mail, and if you're a property owner, especially if you have some high equity or you've owned your property for a while, you've probably received one of these. They call them yellow letters. Typically, they're made to look like they're handwritten, and sometimes they are handwritten on yellow paper. For some reason, I think psychologically that's been proven to be the most effective. So you receive these yellow letters in the mail, and it'll say, I'm so-and-so, I'm interested in purchasing your property, and it'll have a phone number or a URL or some type of language or an email asking you to contact them. And it may even have, an offer included. Sometimes people do that. But these are kind of they send out really large mail campaigns expecting a really small response. Typically, definitely under 10% response rate. Typically I think 2 to 5% is what you can kind of expect depending on the quality of your list and the quality of the letter and the language you've chosen. So what we've done is we use a company to basically produce these for us. They purchase the lists. They actually print out the letters, they fold them, stuff the envelopes, stamp them, and then they send us a box full of all these addressed envelopes, and all we do is drop them in the mail, and that way they're postmarked from our local area, which just increases the chances that somebody will actually open the letter if they see it's sent from a local address and postmarked locally. So just all these little tricks to increase your open rate and your call rate. And there's a couple types of owners that we send to. Number one is absentee owners. So, and all this data is publicly available. So what we try to do is target people that don't live in the properties. And the thinking behind that is either number one, they're a landlord and perhaps a failed landlord, or they inherited the property and don't live in it. And the thinking behind that is those people have the ability to sell, and possibly the motivation to sell. So that's kind of why we target them, right?
Yeah, and there's kind of something special about the letters we send out too, right? A good example is that they look handwritten. People will more likely open something if it looks like has that personal touch to it.
Yeah, and a lot of people actually do handwrite these. We just don't have the time to do that. But they use a font that looks handwritten, and it's funny because when you start getting calls based on these mailings, the perception of the people that receive them is kind of funny sometimes. They literally will think, that you drove by their house, wrote down their address, somehow looked up, who owns it, and mailed them a letter personally. That's just the one letter you mailed, and you just really, really want that house. And they'll call, and sometimes they'll be angry, like, how did you get my information? Why are you calling me? I'm not selling you my house. And, it's kind of interesting, the responses you get. So one of the other strategies when you're using direct mail is we have all our calls fielded by a virtual office type number. We set up a special number that is on the letters so that we have an answering service answer that for us. And then they fill out a web form that we created that sends the data over to Podio, which is a CRM for real estate. And that way we only see the people that are potentially interested, because we gave a script to the people that answer the phone, and they run the callers through that. And if someone's just kicking the tires or is angry and has no interest in selling, then we don't bother responding to them. But if they show any glimmer of interest at all, then we'll get that information and I'll respond to them and call them directly and then possibly go out and see the property if it's after I chat with them and if it seems like a deal could possibly happen.
So, as we've been doing this now and we're acquiring properties, I'm getting more and more of these myself in the mail. I just wanted to call one out because I had seen one recently that actually caught my attention, and it looked like a postcard with a Sharpie handwritten on there with a highlighter pen, so it even got to the point where big, thick, bold letters with a Sharpie to get somebody's attention to make it look personal with that handwritten note.
Now, do you think that was computer-generated font, or did somebody actually write on it?
I think it was computer-generated, but it was really done well with two-color printing because it even had the yellow highlight across the text. But it really stood out when I got it in the mail the other day.
Yep, and that's exactly what you're trying to accomplish, right? When they get a stack of mail, and everybody gets tons of junk mail these days, you want your mail piece, to have the highest chance of being opened. I get tons of junk mail every day. I just basically start filtering through it real quick and throw it in the trash. So what's going to get someone to open yours versus throwing it in the trash? And if it looks like it's a personally written letter or postcard, that increases that chance. So that's the thinking behind that. So as I said, we sent to absentee owners because they have the ability to sell and possibly the motivation to sell. Another group we send to is high equity owners. And it's amazing what you can buy and what data is publicly available. But you can actually filter out lists based on the percentage of equity that the person owns in the property, which, that's invaluable, right? And someone who only has 5 or 10% equity can't sell to you for a discount because they don't have the equity built up. But if someone has over 50% or over 80% equity in their house, that's someone who has the ability to sell their house to you at a deep discount. So those are the people you want to target. And like I said, we're looking for, a possibly 2 to 5% response rate. So if you mail out 100 letters, you're going to get 2 to 5 calls, and maybe only one of those might be even worth pursuing. So the trick to direct mail and yellow letters is to send a lot of letters out on a regular basis. So we do it every three or so weeks. And the company that we use, and we'll put a link in the show notes, I forget their name off the top of my head, but they actually create these letters to be in a series. So if you get one letter, it'll say it has a kind of some wording to it, and then the next letter they get a couple weeks, 3 weeks later says it's kind of increasing in its urgency. Like, hey, I've been trying to get a hold of you. I'd really like to talk to you about this property. And then throughout the series of 6 letters, it increases the urgency. So that really is interesting, the calls you get after they've received 5 or 6 of these. Because, a lot of times they call just to get us to go away, right? Which is fine. We'd either we want them to call us and say go away because we don't want to spend money mailing to them if there's 0% interest in selling. And it still gives us another chance to chat with them too. So, because, we're always super cheerful whenever I chat with anyone, and our answering service is very cheerful. So you never know if you can turn something around. So that's kind of the 2 people we target: absentee owners and high equity owners.
So the high equity owners, just to revisit that for a second, that's also a great candidate for seller financing, right?
Yeah, either one of those categories, absentee owners or high equity owners could potentially be a candidate for a seller financing deal. And something, if they're not willing to take your deeply discounted cash price, then maybe a second attempt could be, a seller financing type of offer if they're not looking to get all the cash at once. Also, it gives them the ability to choose from a couple options rather than saying yes or no. Because if you just say, if they're asking $100,000 and you're offering them 50, the no rate is going to be pretty high on that. They're not going to love that offer. But if you say, well, I could either give you I could purchase it for a deeply discounted price, or we could get closer to the price you're wanting, but we could stretch it out over time and you could carry the note with us. or for us, that might be a slightly more attractive offer to them. And anytime you give people choices rather than just a simple yes or no answer possibility, then your chances of doing a deal go up greatly.
Yeah, it's that concept of you either control the price or you control the terms.
Yep, exactly right.
So let's move on to the bandit signs.
Yep. So another, short, besides mailing people directly, and we do a ton of that, there's also a thing called bandit signs. And I'm sure you've seen these as a real estate investor. It says we buy houses, or we pay cash, or, how we buy houses cheap, we buy ugly houses. There's all kinds of variations of these. And they'll either be like stapled to telephone poles or stuck in the ground, kind of like yard signs along busy thoroughfares in your town. And the idea here is you're hoping to catch the person that maybe has some motivation, has a need to sell their property, and they're maybe having a tough time. And, maybe if they're thinking about listing it possibly, or they just need cash quickly, and you're hoping that right person drives by and sees that number at the right time. I mean, it really is a needle in a haystack type situation, but it's a proven method of marketing. So that's why so many real estate investors do it, because it's one of the lowest cost ways of advertising. I mean, the signs are, $1 or $2 a piece, and you just buy them in bulk and go around, and it's something that you can do with some of your own time, because a lot of real estate investors, when they're starting out, have a lot more time than money, right? So this is a way you can get some marketing out there at pretty low cost to yourself. It just takes some effort. So, and there's a couple tips I would have for bandit signs. Number one is, again, you want it to look, it's funny because when you come from kind of a marketing background, you want everything to look slick and look quality. But some of the best bandit signs out there look like they're handwritten again, right? Like with a Sharpie on a yellow foam board. And a lot of real estate investors actually, do them themselves, or they'll order them printed that way. But again, they look handwritten. And for some reason, those can sometimes get a better response than the ones that look slick and have a regular font that looks like, a computer font. Another tip for bandit signs is to hire somebody like off Craigslist or something and have them place them and text you a picture to prove that they were actually placed in the ground somewhere. So that's kind of a way to keep them on track and make sure that they're not just throwing them in a dumpster somewhere.
It's almost like a two-man team too, right, Josh? You got a situation where you're going to be stopping and starting, and depending on your community, you might want to check where you can place these things without getting into any hot water.
Yeah, and the thing is, you're putting your phone number out on these locations, on these signs, right? So eventually you're going to get a call from somebody who doesn't like where you placed it. Could be the city, the county, a property owner who doesn't take kindly to you putting up a sign on their property, right? Even if it's just the city or whatever. So you kind of have to check with your local regulations to see what's allowed. And, you do feel kind of like a criminal when you're sneaking around, putting them out. So I think a two-man team is a good way to do it. Somebody can be in the passenger seat, jump out, put the sign in. It's also way quicker that way too. So I definitely felt like a criminal when I was doing it by myself. So it is kind of a guerrilla technique, but it's effective. So, that's why so many people do it, and you see those signs everywhere. It's an effective method. So definitely something to try.
I think a third tip that we probably should bring up too is you're always going to put a URL on the bandit sign as well, and try to come up with something that's memorable, because half the time they're not going to call you from the car, and they're not going to look at the website on their phone. So we have yuckyhouse.com. It's memorable and something that they can follow up with later.
Yep, when they're driving by, you have to make it such a memorable either URL or phone number. A lot of times people will buy those phone numbers that have, you can change to letters like 1-800-UGLY-HOUSE or something. So, that's something, if you drive by, it's going to stick in your brain long enough where you can actually remember what it is when you get to where you're going. So that's why we purchased yuckyhouse.com. So even if they can't remember our number, which isn't the easiest number to remember, they can hopefully at least remember the URL. So when they get where they're going, they can actually follow up with us if they choose to.
So is there any final tips on this that we haven't thought of yet?
No, just, if you're if you're an investor that's just starting out and you have more time than money, bandit signs can be a great way to do it. And direct mail, even though it's a little more expensive, if you're willing to do the work and actually handwrite the letters themselves, obviously paper's cheap, envelopes are cheap. If the expense would be buying the list. So that's a couple quick ways, direct mail and bandit signs, where you can really get some good marketing out there and start doing your first couple deals with pretty little money. So definitely some things to check out.
Well, if that's the case, let's go to our lesson of the week. And this is going to be associated with something that we've experienced personally. But in the end, we're going to say don't fall for tenant excuses. And we have one in particular where we took over a twin home, and she had plenty of time to vacate the premises, and we kept being asked for extensions. In fact, she, in the end, from the old seller and us, she had, a month and 2 days extra to vacate?
Yeah, and here's where you got to really know your local regulations and what's legal, right? Because when people start, delaying wanting to leave a property, even at the end of their lease is up, and, luckily we didn't have somebody ready to move in. This is something we're going to rehab, so it wasn't as crucial. But let's say, what if we had somebody ready to move in, like on the 1st of the month? You can't have somebody staying in past the 31st. But that causes a huge problem. So the lesson really is to look for, your spidey sense. If it's starting to tingle, then look for those red flags, and you want to make sure you follow the law. Of course, you have to follow the law and make sure you're using all legal means to get someone out of a property if your spidey sense is tingling and you just don't feel like they're going to follow through with what they're saying. Because a lot of times people really kind of know the system and they know how to work it, and they're almost like professional tenants. And they're really good at working around things, and they might take advantage of you as a nice guy landlord. So you just need to have all the legal means at your disposal and just follow through. And what we do up front, or we have our property managers do, is explain all these things. And of course, we're talking about inherited tenants here, so we didn't have the chance to vet this particular tenant. But you can prevent a lot of this by instructing your property manager to just very plainly spell things out. If we don't get rent by such and such day, there's a late fee, and then after such and such day, we begin eviction proceedings, and that's just how it happens. So they can't ever say that they weren't told. So when it comes time to actually execute those legal means, then that's just it's just understood that's what's happening. You're not the bad guy. You're just following through on what you promised.
And yeah, we might do a case study on this property down the road, but in the end, even given all of this extra time to vacate the premises, the property ended up being in really rough condition, and she left half of her stuff in there, and right now we're spending a lot of time and resources emptying it. So,
yep. That's just part of the game. That's something that's going to happen a certain percentage of the time. So what do? You just get a roll-off dumpster in the driveway, and we hired a friend's kid to come in and pull all her junk out of there, and said, keep whatever you want, throw the rest in the dumpster, and in a couple of days we'll have it all cleaned out and ready to start rehabbing.
So, but one funny aspect of this is that we know the seller personally, and he asked what happened to the refrigerator, because apparently he had purchased a brand new refrigerator for her, a side-by-side, and it wasn't in there.
Yeah, that was pretty funny. We were showing him pictures, and he said, what's that fridge? I bought her a new fridge a couple years ago. So apparently she had sold that out from under him and kept the old one. So, you never know what's going to happen. That's why it's important to inspect your properties regularly too.
So in the Coach's Corner, Josh has a book, The Dip by Seth Godin. I've read quite a few Godin books, but I haven't read this one.
Yeah, one of my favorite books ever on marketing is called Purple Cow by Seth Godin. I love that book. And here's another one of his called The Dip. It's just a small little book. It's 80 pages. And what it covers is basically in every entrepreneurial journey, there's always going to be a point at which it seems like it's not working out. You know, the initial excitement has passed of starting the journey on this business, and things start to get hard, right? And he calls that the dip. And basically he kind of goes through whether you should quit or not. And sometimes you should. I mean, if something's not working out and it's not looking like it's going to, he makes the argument that would be okay to just, stop the business. It's better than driving it into the ground and losing a bunch more resources. But he also teaches you how to analyze the dip and that downturn and to see if it's something you should push through or not as well. And then if you do, you're going to be a lot more equipped to actually come out the other side in a profitable place and with a better mindset. So it's kind of preparing for that inevitable downturn and how to deal with it, whether you should quit or not. And if you don't, then just to persevere that much more, and gives you some strategies to push through that. So great book.
So as always, we ask you to provide us some feedback. How's the audio quality? Would you like us to focus on specific topics? Provide the feedback directly on Facebook or Twitter at REI Rookies.
And if you like what you're hearing, make sure you head over to iTunes and subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It really helps other rookie real estate investors find us.
And remember, get off the bench
and get it in the game. We'll see you next time.
Welcome to the REI Rookies Podcast, which is bandit signs and yellow letters. We already talked about, we're going to have to do it again. So the bandit sign things is one of the interesting ones here, Josh, because we outsource to